So good morning, and I'm thinking that many of you this morning, in hearing that this talk was going to be on money, were probably thinking we were going to talk about budgets and saving and how to get out of debt. And although those are important things, actually this morning we're going to have a little bit different area of focus. What I want to talk about this morning is more of the emotional and spiritual aspects of money. So how it makes us feel, what it means to us, and how it affects our lives and our relationships. Now, I've been a CPA for more than 20 years, as Carolyn said, and I've seen in working with people, individuals, and organizations time and again that although money seems like a very quantifiable and very black and white kind of thing, that what I've learned from working with people in my business, family, and friends, and really in my own life, that there's just so much more to money than go find a job, save money, go through that whole process in your life. And what I believe is the reason that we tend to think of money more in a head aspect, but really it's more of a heart thing that drives our relationship with money and how we deal with money. And it's interesting to me because over the years and kind of seeing how people deal with money in my own life and other conversations I've had with people, I think money is a lot like food and exercise. I think most of us would say that here in our head, we know what we need to do with respect to food and exercise. But somehow, getting from our head to actually our heart and our behaviors, that seems to be where the real challenge is oftentimes. And we know that if we have that extra piece of cake every night, or if we stop at the mall on the way home from work twice a week and shop, then we're going to gain weight, or we're not going to get out of debt and not going to save the money that we want to save. But so why is it in this culture especially, our behaviors are so slow to catch up with what we know we want to do, and yet we find it so difficult? And I believe that the reason is because at the core that there's really emotional and spiritual things going on that are really driving that and that struggle. So that's what we're going to talk about more this morning. And one of my favorite professors in my graduate program, he's a very wise man, and he has a lot of wonderful, fun metaphors for life, for great truths of life. And one of the things that he always said is the head is a rabbit and the heart is a turtle. And my experience is that when it comes to money, we tend to be more rabbit-like, and we're figuring things out up here. And so this morning, I'm going to ask you all to kind of slow down, and we're going to spend what I'm going to call a little turtle time this morning. We're going to get down here a little bit. So in September of 2008, American Psychological Association found that in a survey, 80% of Americans said that money was causing stress in their life and in their relationship. And that was an increase from just a year ago, but even a year before that, it was 70%. So whether it's 70 or 80%, what that says to me is that money is indeed a real stressor in our lives, and it impacts our well-being personally, and it impacts the well-being of the relationships that we're in. And when we're experiencing financial stress, it increases the likelihood that we're going to have symptoms of depression. It can make it more difficult to just take care of all the life things that you need to be dealing with. It generally decreases our well-being, and it can impact our physical health as well. And for any of us here who either have been, and there may be some people here today who are going through some difficult financial times, you don't need a study to tell you that. You know that this is something that really affects us all. I want to share a little bit about my own story. Money has played a very interesting role in my life. When I was in my 20s, I would say that I was obsessed with money. I saw money as a way to keep score. a way to show, kind of validate myself that I had value and that I was somebody. And I was unbelievably driven. I had all these goals of how much money that I was going to make at a certain time in my life. I worked tons of hours, just pretty much obsessed. And then when I was in my 30s, things took a huge change in my life. I found myself in the middle of going through a divorce and saddled with tens of thousands of dollars in debt. My soon-to-be ex-husband had started a company, and we had a tremendous amount of debts. And I personally felt morally obligated to repay those debts as best I could. And unfortunately, my ex-husband didn't see it that way. And so we got divorced. I took on just a tremendous amount of debt. And while it was very overwhelming and I felt like I was in a pit of sorts, wondering will I ever climb my way out of this, at the same time, for me it was the beginning of a really personal journey. And at that time, I went through a spiritual transformation in my life, and God really got a hold of my heart, and He started to change my relationship and my understanding and my values around money. And so for me, that was the beginning of what's really been a lifelong journey. And although it was fun, not fun, and nothing hard ever is, I'm grateful for where it's got me today. And I believe all of that's a big part of why I have so much passion about this, and why I chose to go back to school and get my master's in counseling. And as you would expect, there's not too many CPAs in the counseling program. I'm kind of this really strange person that has this left and right brain thing going on. So anyway, I wanted to share that because I think sometimes one of the reasons that I have a lot of passion for what I do is that I think sometimes people think, oh, you're a CPA, so you know, money is easy for you, it's never been a problem, it's just a natural thing. And not true. I mean, because all my own issues in my life, I've had my own wrestles and struggle with it. And my friends that are CPAs, my girlfriends, we used to always say, give me your finances and I can whip them into shape. But when I'm dealing with my own finances, all my emotional stuff comes in there. So I'm an emotional person too, just like you. So I think that's a really important thing to remember. In the United States, money is the #1 source of arguments in marriages. In the early years of marriage, and disagreements over money is the most often cited reason when couples go through a divorce. So unfortunately, for whatever reason in this culture, I think we think it's unromantic. People don't want to deal with it. We don't sit down and talk about these things before we enter into committed relationships. And it's sad to me, and another reason why I'm so passionate about what I want to do, because I feel like this is an area where we can really make an impact on marriages and on reducing divorces to help people to deal with this. I think another reason people find it difficult to talk about money is we never really learned how to talk about it in our families growing up. And many parents don't really teach or talk to their kids about money. But remember this, even if there wasn't anything overtly said, I guarantee you were taught things. And you know, the old taught or caught, and we teach our children by how we behave around money. And I wanted to share a little story about my family. I grew up on a farm, 6 kids, and my mother, my parents never talked to us about money, but I in reflecting on this, I caught a lot of things about money. And one of the things my mom used to always do, very high value on frugality. So my mother had all these sayings like, you can't eat steak every day, and you can't have everything you want, and those kinds of, so for her, frugality, self-discipline, delaying gratification, really, really high values. And then the other thing was, though, every time we needed something, I never heard my parents ever say, we can't afford that. I never heard a discussion about a budget. My mom and dad paid cash for everything. When the car got old, they went to town and they took cash and bought a car. I grew up thinking that people who bought things on credit were like evil or something, because that was the message that was in my home. So given that background, my brothers and I, we just had this idea that when you needed something, you bought it. So one time, my folks were gone. I was in high school and they were gone for the weekend or something. And so a couple of my brothers and I were there and we were doing life chores, and I was the only girl, so I had the unfortunate job of having to do more of the housework in my family, which I think is why I hate housework today. And so my job was to do the dishes. Well, the dishwasher broke. Well, my brothers and I decided that we needed a new dishwasher. And so this is one of the benefits of living in a small town. So we picked up the phone and called the local hardware store and said, this is the Senestraro family and we need a new dishwasher. And they said, what kind do you want? And we looked at the kind we had and we said, bring us the same one we have now. And so they brought us a dishwasher and delivered it. And needless to say, my parents were a little bit surprised when they came home from vacation and found out that their children had bought them a new dishwasher. But, you know, I really don't remember them getting mad. We kept the dishwasher. So when I look back at that, for me, I always thought there was always enough money. The message it sent me was, if I'm frugal and I don't buy things that are too expensive. My mom used to, we couldn't have grapes unless they were 39 cents a pound. We never ever had them another way. And I had this mindset that if I did those little things, there would always be plenty of money in the bank account for what I needed. Well, as we all know, there's some really good truths and principles, I think, in what my parents taught us, you know, by not saying. But there was also a lot of mistruths and things that aren't true, because we all know that you don't always just automatically have the money in your bank account if you're frugal. So I share that because I think that there's a lot of things that we learn that we don't necessarily stop and think about. So what I want to do right now is I would like to just take a couple minutes at your table, and if you look in your packet, I've made a list of some questions about your family of origin. Pardon me, I'm turning into a counselor person. We call that the FOO. Your family of origin, and I'd like you to just talk at your table and maybe share whatever you're comfortable with, something you remember about growing up in your family. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes, and then if people have something they want to share with the group, that would be great. So go ahead and just visit amongst yourself for a minute. Okay. I'm gonna ask you to focus back up. I know that I'm glad you're all chatting and I hear a nice buzz in the room. So would anyone be open to sharing something that you shared with people at your table that you remembered about money and your family? Oh, come on, somebody. Thank you.
I will. I was just remembering that when my mother was a single parent, my father passed away when I was very young, and I was the only kid in the house. But I remember on a Wednesday, she came home and she goes, "Where is the butter?" There was about an inch of butter left on the plate, and I said, "Oh, well, I had some toast." You know, I just had some toast, and she said, "How many pieces?" And I just remember this. I was about 10 years old. And she said, "How many pieces?" And I said, 6. And just had a little toast. After school, she goes, that was the rest of the week's worth of bread and butter. And so she said, "I can't buy more. I can't buy anymore." And so it's just those kinds of memories that is very, very ingrained. That's quite a while ago.
Yeah.
Wow. But yeah, I do remember.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Anything you want to share? No? Well, I hope it triggered your memory and maybe give you some things to think about. And if you're in a relationship, it'd be a great thing to talk about with your other half and just kind of help you both to understand a little bit better kind of where you come from and what impacted you growing up. And so I wanted to say about these things that, you know, happened to us and what we learned growing up in our family. You know, there's good and bad to all those things. And in my family, my siblings and I, we kind of have a saying, and we say, we got to sort through the parent tapes. And that dates me. So those of you who are younger, I was thinking maybe sort through the MP3 messages or something. But so this applies to all parts of our life, not just money. But, you know, our parents teach us things, and we need to sort those through and say, this one, not so good, not so healthy, I need to throw that out. This one's some good and some bad. This is something really good. And, you know, every one of us has good and bad because we were raised by imperfect people, but we need to sort those things through. And, you know, I just can't say enough about how important I think that is, you know, in our lives in terms of understanding our relationship to money and in terms of just understanding ourselves overall. So I encourage you to think about that. So now I want to take a look at some of the kinds of feelings and emotions and values that we attach to money. And these are in your packet on a list. And I'm just going to walk through some of these. I think it's the third page. And so the first one we're going to talk about is what we call the affective values, or really the qualities that we attach to money. And we could call that sort of the good bad of money. Some people see money as good, as important, attractive, things to be desired. And some of you are probably thinking, well, doesn't everyone see money that way? Some people see money as bad, as a headache, as just an overwhelming burden. And it's been interesting for me because, as Carolyn was saying, you know, I've spent my last 15 years of my life working with nonprofit organizations, and you know, before that I'd always been in the big corporate world, and very, very different. And one of the things that's so different is that what I learned is that people who are drawn to mission-driven organizations, and particularly social service organizations, and a lot of my clients, like Albertina Kerr, are dealing with Albertina Kerr deals with people with disabilities and abused kids, foster care, that type of thing. So a lot of folks who are drawn to what I'm going to call the more nurturing fields, these people, they hate money. They hate it. They think it's evil. They just go, ugh, you know, they just don't want to deal with it. And that's really interesting, because what I find that is oftentimes in relationships, I think we have a more analytical person, maybe a little more of the other side of the brain person, tends to be drawn to a person with this more nurturing kind of background, and that tends to come together as a match. But then there'll be conflict in that area, because those people really see money very, very differently. And so I think that's very interesting. Now, a second category of ideas people have about money would be called what we call the cognitive values, and basically that's kind of what we think about money. And so we think about money as representing achievement, representing respect, and it has this ability to give us, we perceive, to give us freedom and control. And in this culture, I think money serves as a measurement of success, and it's a little bit of a way of keeping score, and I shared a little bit about that in my own life. And I think all of us, we can get in that mindset that says, you know, my salary, what percentage increase I got, what bonus I got. It's a very concrete way that we feel our value is being measured, and we can tend to look at it that way. And I think oftentimes here in our culture, there's a tendency to think that net worth equals self-worth. And I don't think that's the case, but I think that's something that all of us kind of wrestle with a bit. Next, money can also mean you're deserving of respect. I think people who make a lot of money, we tend to believe that those folks deserve more respect than someone with a lesser earning power. I think as a general rule, people would tend to give more of a sense of respect to, say, a neurosurgeon than a garbage collector. And there's this status that comes along with job position and earning power. And so we tend to admire people based on that. And I think it's interesting, I think that most of us think that having lots of money or more money is going to make our life better. And what's really fascinating to me, and now that I'm, a student, I'm always reading studies, and what I find interesting is in the sociological field, a lot of these studies to me validate what I already know as common sense and sort of life experience, which is sort of validating to learn that. But one of the things, time and time again, they've done so many studies on money and how it makes us feel. And most people, if you ask them, would say, well, if I had this much more, I'd be happier, or at this level's where I'd be really happy. And time again, the studies show that it's just not true. And so what it shows is that if people are making that is true up to a certain level at about $55,000 a year, which I would argue, national average, that's kind of like enough money to live and have a family and not to really be wanting for anything of significant. Might not sound like a lot of money to us, but we live in a more expensive area. And the studies show that once you get to about $55,000, that it really levels off, and that additional money actually does not make people happier. And what the sociologists call this phenomenon is the adaptation process. And simply put, in lay terms, that really just means we get used to stuff and we take it for granted. And I think we all know that we do this. I don't know about you, but I buy a new car and I'm so excited, and about 2 weeks later, it's like I just don't even care anymore. And so, whether it's a new car, a new house, a new laptop that goes faster and better, we get so excited about it, and then within a very short amount of time, we just get used to it. And so it quickly just sort of loses its allure. So it's interesting because we spend a lot of time and energy thinking, let's make more money and that's going to make us happier. But it really isn't true. Another way that we think about money is the freedom that it brings. And I think, again, our culture, we put such a high value on independence. I think of the Burger King slogan, have it your way. We want things our way. We want to do what we want to do. We want to come and go when we want to come and go. We want to call the shots. And we put this incredible kind of admiration in our society on what we call, the self-made man or self-made woman. And so freedom to us, money equals freedom. I have a lot of money, I can do what I want. But I was thinking about someone like Bill Gates, and clearly he has a lot of money. And yes, in some ways he can do what he wants, but in other ways I would argue that he's really under the microscope, and people are looking at what he does, and he really doesn't have he doesn't have the same freedom I have. People aren't looking and watching what I'm doing. And so I think it's interesting when we think about that. Again, we have these ideas, but do they actually pan out? And then the third piece associated with values around money would be the behavioral ethic. And we're talking about how we use money and how we behave with money, and sort of what do we think about that. And it's interesting if you look at kind of the items that I put on the list here, you sort of have on the one side, I think we would tend to say, oh, those are sort of the responsible people who are responsible with money, and the other side would be people who are irresponsible with money. And I'm going to challenge us this morning a little bit on that. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Dave Ramsey. People know Dave Ramsey, the financial peace guru. And one of the things Dave says that I really like is he calls that people in relationships that live on the left and the right side of this list, he calls that the nerd and the free spirit. And the free spirit wants to just live and enjoy life, and the nerd wants to make a spreadsheet about everything. And I have a confession to make. I'm a little bit more the nerd. I am kind of a spreadsheet person. Love a good spreadsheet. And so, and Dave's point is always that, you know, there's good and bad in that. And in the psychology world, we call that the good-bad split. And there's a healthy tension in that of us recognizing that nothing is all good or all bad. And there's good things that are brought together by both of those approaches to life. And I had a dear friend who's like a mom to me, who's in her 80s, and she passed away a couple of years ago. And I used to cringe sometimes when she would tell me how much money she was giving to her kids or grandkids, to charities. And I would worry about her because I felt like she was giving away too much money. And I had this little sense of like it was almost on the edge of being irresponsible. And when she passed away, she had plenty of money left over. And what I learned from that is, you know, it was really a blessing to people and organizations in her life and to her to be able to give so generously. And it really makes me kind of take a look at my own values around money and say, you know, what's really more right? And I guess to me that's a really important perspective that I'm learning, not only about money, but everything in life. And that is that that my view is not the right view, and that it's so important that we're open to other perspectives. And of course, you know, there's a balance on all of this, and I know some of you are thinking, oh, I want her to give me a neat and tidy answer on to what the answer is and what this should look like. Well, I will tell you this, all the research shows, and again, I don't need research to tell me this because I know it to be true, and that is when we are out of balance with money, either obsessing about saving it and being frugal, or on the other side, when we're spending and living beyond our means, either one causes a lot of stress in our lives and will have a negative impact on our well-being. And because of what I do, people ask me all the time for a formulaic answer to these things of the sort of how to handle money. How much do I save? How much do I give? How much do I spend? How big of a house is too much of a house? When is it okay that I buy this? And I think that we want answers that are quick and easy to these big questions. But to me, it's an emotional and spiritual thing, and it doesn't really fit too well in a neat and tidy box. And I think the most important thing is that all of us earnestly struggle through these questions. They're good questions to be asking, and we need to be reflecting and asking those questions. And I think with reflection and earnest struggle, then there starts to be more clarity in our lives on these things. So, that being said, I do want to talk about, I think this is on the slides, the second page of the slides, the back side of the slides. If you go to the 4 cornerstones of financial well-being, there's 2 little slides there. I want to talk about that a little bit. How am I doing on time, Carolyn? I'm okay, I'm almost done. So, the cornerstone of financial well-being. So, I do believe that these 4 pillars are kind of your foundation for financial well-being, and that is living within your means, saving and investing, giving, and being financially content. And all of these things really flow out of our spiritual worldview, which is really how do you answer the big questions in life? The big questions of, you know, what's important, what gives me purpose, who's God, is there meaning to life, all of those kinds of questions. Because when you wrestle with those bigger questions, then those other pillars start to fall into place. So if you believe all people in the world have value to God and we're all, He loves each and every one of us, then that is going to drive how you choose to live and deal with your money. Because when we see things like what's just happened in Haiti, I've seen some pretty amazing stories about people canceling their weddings and things to give money. So money and how we deal with it is going to flow out of how we see the world and what we see is important and what has meaning. It's been said that your bank account and your credit card statements are theological documents because they tell the world, if someone were to look at those, it says what's important to you and what you value. And I really believe that's extremely true. When I work with couples around money issues in a relationship, one of the important things that I like to have people do is to reflect on these things and their values and then come together and talk about those. And I did put something in your packet, some questions, and I would encourage those of you who are, if you're single, go through and do it yourself. If you're in a relationship, do it with your other half. And maybe when this talk gets recorded, you could even have them watch it and talk about it. I think it'd be really some great conversation to open up with your partner. So, so finally, in conclusion, I just would say, I hope that you felt like the time together this morning was valuable, and that being a turtle for a little while has given you something to think about. And I thank you for coming this morning. Thank you.
Am I on? We have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. Does anyone in the audience have anything they'd like to ask Debbie? Yeah, in the back.
You pointed out how my parents gave me all kinds of subtle hints about money and how to handle my money. Can you suggest any ways that I can give my children, either directly or subtly, hints to start saving now because they don't really see that that's important?
So the question is, how can I as a parent subtly or directly influence my children to handle money wisely, like saving, for example?
Yeah, this is interesting. I have to preface by saying I don't have kids. So I always feel like I'm talking in theory and not in the trenches, you know. And so I just think it's really important to be more open with kids about money, and to I like the idea of giving kids a budget and teaching them about giving, teaching them about saving, and saving up for things that you want. But I think, you know, there's that balance, because I also don't think that it's appropriate to make your children carry the weight of, you know, adult financial responsibilities if you're having problems, you know, with money, because that's scary for kids and they need to feel that safety. But I just think it's important that we teach the kids the realness of the finiteness of money. You know, that it is, because I think kids really feel like there's like an endless pot. You know, they just have no concept. Well, dear, just give me $20. Go get some money out of the ATM. So I know that's a really brief answer to a very complicated question, but there's some really good books that are out there on that. I think Dave Ramsey has some on his website you might check out that have some good suggestions.
Anyone else? Yeah, get in the back.
Have you heard any interesting facts or insights into the relative happiness of lottery winners?
Oh, yeah. Well,
what have you heard about?
I actually used something on that in a talk I did at school. Lottery winners, it's horrible. And part of that, I would argue, is most people who play the lottery have come from a lower socioeconomic background. They've never had money, and it's just like an overwhelming thing for them, because their relationships get all wacky because people start coming to them for money. That's actually, lottery winners actually are less happy after they win the money, believe it or not. And I think that makes sense to me, given you know, it's sort of like all of a sudden, well, you think about young athletes who come from poverty and they're making so much money. I mean, it ruins them half the time. It's like they cannot handle it, and they get so vulnerable to it. They get taken advantage of, or you know, just not know how to manage it.
How about one more? Yeah.
How important do you think giving is to personal success and finance?
Yeah, well, personally, I'm incredibly passionate about giving, and you know, Yeah, I think that, you know, it changes our attitude around money. And I think that one of the things that I like to talk to people about is, I think sometimes when you're learning to become a giver, a lot of times people will just give when they're asked. And I think one of the things that's really important is to start giving proactively. So whether that's your church, if you're involved in the faith community, or if there's organizations that you have passion for what they do. Because I think it's important that we give from the top rather than if I have something left over after I've got everything I want. It's a lot different mindset, and I think spiritually, emotionally, that's a lot different place to come from. So I like to give out of a grateful heart, of an attitude of gratefulness. I think that's really important.
Okay. Are you available for questions after?
I'm available for questions. I have
Okay.
to go to school at 9 o'clock this morning, but I'm here till then.
Okay, well, thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome.